You are standing in front of the mirror and you have just tried the French tuck for the very first time. You watched it look effortless on someone else in a video online, polished, put together, almost effortlessly accidental in how good it looked on her, as if she barely thought about it at all. So you try it yourself at home exactly the way you were shown step by step, and instead of creating the balance you honestly expected, the blouse pulls tightly across your sides, gathers in a small, stubborn bunch right near your waistband, and draws your eye directly to the exact area you were hoping to soften in the first place. If that has happened to you, and honestly, if you are watching this video right now, it very probably has, please hear this clearly before we go any further together. Your body is not the mistake here, and it never was, not for one single moment. A single styling technique taught the exact same way to every single body shown in that video was never actually going to work identically on every proportion out there, and that includes yours, no matter how many times you have watched it demonstrated on someone else. Here is something worth noticing, something most fashion advice never mentions at all, and honestly should. That blouse might have looked perfectly fine while you were standing still in front of the mirror, holding a careful pose for just long enough to decide it worked. But sit down at a table, reach for something on a shelf above your head, turn to the side or walk across a room, and the whole picture can change completely, often in ways a carefully posed photograph never shows you and never really will. Today, we are going through 6 genuinely different practical ways to wear a blouse when you have a fuller midsection, and none of them require losing weight, hiding your whole body under layers of loose fabric, or pretending you have a completely different shape than you actually have right now. Each method solves one specific, real, recognizable problem you may have run into again and again, whether that is fabric pulling uncomfortably across your sides, an unhelpful hemline landing right at your widest point, a front closure that gapes open or collapses flat against you, or a waistband that catches, bunches, and rubs the moment you finally sit down after standing all day. And the very last one, the one we deliberately save for the strongest finish, might honestly be the most useful realization in this entire video, because 2 women who both describe themselves as having a fuller midsection can actually need 2 completely different solutions, depending on exactly where they personally carry that fullness, how their own torso happens to be built, and even how their bust factors into the whole picture. Stay with me through all 6, because that final piece is genuinely what finally lets everything else here make sense, instead of feeling like 6 separate, unconnected tips floating on their own. Let's start right now with the very first practical method, the one that begins in the exact moment fabric gets pulled flat and tight against your stomach, before you have even had a real chance to move. Number 6, the Blouson Blouse Method. Picture the moment right after you tuck a blouse in. The fabric goes flat, smooth, and pulled tight against your stomach, with nowhere to move, nothing softening the line underneath. That flatness is often the exact opposite of what you were hoping for, because instead of skimming past your midsection, the fabric is now pressed directly against it. Here is the thing. The answer is not simply to leave everything completely untucked and shapeless either, because a blouse with no shape at all can end up looking bigger than it needs to, adding bulk rather than removing attention from anywhere in particular. There is a middle option between fully flat and fully shapeless, and it comes from a soft, controlled blouson effect, where the blouse is allowed to gently gather and skim at the waist instead of being pulled tight or left hanging with no shape whatsoever. To try this, choose a blouse that has a little extra width built into it, and instead of pulling the fabric taut anywhere, let it fall loosely and naturally around your waist. Gently shake the fabric outward at your sides before you check the mirror, giving it room to settle rather than cling. Check this while standing in front of the mirror, and notice whether the fabric skims past your stomach instead of pressing against it. Check it again while sitting down, because a blouson effect that looks lovely standing can sometimes collapse and pull tight the moment you sit. Check the side view too, since a soft front can still look oddly bunched from the side if the fabric is not distributed evenly all the way around. If you carry more fullness higher on your stomach, a bit more Blouson fullness concentrated right at that point can genuinely help. If your fullness sits lower, you may want a slightly longer blouse so that softness continues past that area instead of stopping short. A larger bust may need a touch more overall width so the blouson does not pull tight before it even reaches your waist. If your torso is shorter, an overly full blouson can shorten it further, so a more moderate amount often works better, while a longer torso usually has more room to work with. Fabric matters here too. A very thin, clingy fabric tends to defeat this effect entirely, while something with a bit of body and drape holds the soft shape you are going for. This is not about tucking correctly or incorrectly, and it never really was. It is about giving the fabric somewhere real to go. Number 5, the curved or high-low hem method. Now think about the hem itself, the actual bottom edge of the blouse, and the line it creates across your body. A straight across hem, whether you tuck it or leave it hanging, creates one strong horizontal line, and if that line lands right at your widest point, tucking it in does not change the shape of that line. It only moves it to a different, often more noticeable spot on your body. A softly curved hem behaves very differently. Instead of one flat horizontal line, it dips slightly lower at certain points, breaking up that strong straight edge. A shirt tail hem does something similar, staying a bit longer at the sides and back while remaining shorter through the center front. A subtle high-low hem takes this a step further, with a more visible difference between the front and back lengths. There is a limit here, though. An excessively dramatic high-low hem can start to look unbalanced rather than intentional, so the goal is a believable difference, not an extreme one. Leave the sides down naturally when you try this. If you do use any tucking at all, keep it small and centered at the back only, never pulled across the front, where it would undo the entire purpose of the curve. Check the front first, and notice where the longest point of the hem actually falls. Check the side too, because a curve that looks intentional from the front can sometimes look uneven or accidental from the side if it is not falling correctly. Check the back as well, especially if you have added any tuck there. Then sit down and watch closely whether the hem shifts unevenly on one side, since a hem that behaves beautifully standing can still ride up unpredictably the moment you take a seat. If your fullness sits lower on your stomach, a hem that curves lower specifically at the center front rather than at the sides tends to work in your favor. A shorter torso can be visually cut by too dramatic a high-low difference, so a subtler curve is usually more flattering, while a longer torso often has more room to carry a more pronounced curve without looking out of proportion. The fabric matters as well. A curved hem needs enough weight and structure to fall cleanly and hold its shape, rather than curling awkwardly or losing its line entirely by the end of the day. No single hem length is correct for every fuller belly, and that is genuinely fine, not a failure on your part. What matters most is understanding what that hemline is actually doing on your own particular body. Number 4, the Strategic Partial-Fastening Method. Now let's talk about the front of the blouse, and specifically what happens when every single button is closed all the way up. A fully fastened blouse, whether tucked or left hanging straight, can create one flat, uninterrupted panel of fabric stretched across your stomach, and that flat panel can already be drawing attention before tucking even becomes a factor at all. One useful adjustment is leaving the last button or two undone near the bottom, as long as it stays over a secure underlayer so nothing is ever accidentally exposed. Another option is choosing a blouse with a wrap or surplus front, where the fabric naturally overlaps diagonally instead of closing flat down the center. Both approaches interrupt that solid vertical panel and replace it with a softer, more broken up line. This is not permission to leave a blouse gaping open in a way that feels insecure or shows more than you intended. If a button left open causes the fabric to pull apart unexpectedly, or if a wrap front does not stay closed on its own, that particular blouse or that particular adjustment is simply not the right fit for this method, and that is completely fine to notice and move past. Check bust security first. making sure nothing shifts or gapes unexpectedly as you move your arms. Check stomach coverage next, confirming the underlayer or wrap stays in place the way you intended. Sit down and lean forward slightly, the way you might reaching for a bag or a cup, and notice whether the front holds its shape or pulls open under that movement. Check the side profile too, since an overlap that looks intentional from the front can sometimes look strange or lopsided from the side if it has shifted even slightly out of place. If you carry more fullness higher on your stomach, a wrap or overlap front can be especially useful since it breaks up a flat panel sitting directly over that fuller upper area. If you leave the bottom buttons open, make sure the blouse has enough length that the opening does not stop right at your widest point, which would only draw more attention there instead of less. A larger bust needs enough overlap fabric in a wrap front to stay secure without gaping, so a bit more overlap than you might expect is usually the safer choice. Torso length does not change this particular method very much either way. Fabric with a bit of structure holds an overlap far better than something thin and slippery, which tends to shift and lose its shape throughout the day. This section is about how the front closes, nothing more and nothing less than that. Number 3, the open vertical layering method. Here is a difference worth noticing. A single blouse worn completely closed and alone puts your entire visual attention onto one wide, uninterrupted expanse of fabric, with nothing breaking it up anywhere. Open that same blouse over something simple underneath, and the picture changes entirely, because now you have two clean vertical edges running down the front instead of one wide horizontal panel across the middle. To try this, leave the blouse unbuttoned, or only partially buttoned, over a simple underlayer, something plain like a soft tank or a fitted layering piece. Let the open edges of the blouse fall naturally, creating two vertical lines that frame the center of your body rather than covering it edge to edge in one solid block. Check first while standing, making sure that opening stays roughly centered rather than sliding off to one side, which can look accidental rather than intentional. Sit down next and see closely whether the open blouse stays where you placed it or whether it falls open too widely and loses its shape the moment you settle into a chair. Check the side view as well, since this layered look needs to hold together from every angle, not only straight on from the front. Reach for something and notice whether the layers shift out of place or stay put through ordinary movement. If you carry more fullness through your upper stomach, this vertical line can be especially useful since it naturally draws the eye up and down through the center rather than across your widest point. If your fullness sits lower, make sure the open blouse extends past that area rather than stopping short and leaving it exposed and uncovered on its own. A larger bust may need a slightly wider blouse overall, so the open front does not gap too widely right where you least want it to. Torso length does not change this method very much, whether yours runs shorter or longer than average. Keep the underlayer simple and quiet, in a single color or a subtle texture, so it does not compete for attention with the vertical line the open blouse is creating. A patterned or busy underlayer can undo the entire effect, pulling focus away from the clean lines you are trying to create in the first place, so the simpler choice is almost always the better one here. This is not a claim that vertical lines make every single woman look thinner, because that would honestly not be accurate or fair to promise anyone watching. It is simply one more genuine tool for creating visual balance, and you do not need to buy several new pieces to try it, since a plain underlayer you likely already own will usually do the job perfectly well. Number 2, the waistband interaction check. Let's talk about the exact point where your blouse actually meets the waistband of your pants, jeans, or skirt, because this is one of the most physically uncomfortable spots on the entire body, and it rarely gets any attention in typical styling advice. A French tuck concentrates extra fabric right at that line, and that concentrated fabric can pull, bunch, catch, or create pressure exactly where you least want it, especially the longer you sit or move around. This section stays focused entirely on the blouse, not on the pants, jeans, or skirt underneath it, so the goal is choosing a blouse length and fabric that either clears the waistband entirely when worn untucked, or, if you do use some tucking, uses the smallest possible amount of extra fabric bulk right at that specific point. Check where the bottom of the blouse actually lands relative to your waistband, not just while standing still, but while sitting, reaching upward, and turning to the side as well. Standing alone rarely tells the whole story here. While standing, notice whether fabric is already bunching at the waistband before you have even moved. While sitting, watch closely whether the blouse rides upward and gathers against the waistband, since this is often when the real discomfort actually shows up. From the side, check whether visible fabric bulk is pressing outward against the waistband, since that pressure is often easier to see from this angle than from straight ahead. Fullness carried higher on your stomach does not change this particular check very much either way, since the waistband sits below that area regardless. If your fullness sits lower, this is often exactly where waistband interaction matters most, because the lower belly naturally sits closest to that line, and that proximity makes bunching and pressure far more noticeable and far more uncomfortable throughout the day. Bust size does not meaningfully change this particular check. A shorter torso often means less overall distance between your bust and your waistband, so any extra bulk concentrated at that point tends to stand out more. A longer torso typically allows a bit more fabric ease without visible bunching, simply because there is more distance for the fabric to travel and settle naturally. Fabric choice makes a real practical difference here. A lighter weight or more fluid fabric bunches noticeably less at the waistband than something stiff or heavy, which tends to hold its shape in a way that creates pressure rather than releasing it. No single method here eliminates every single bit of discomfort, and it would honestly not be truthful to promise that to anyone watching. But paying close attention to this one specific point, sitting down and reaching before deciding a blouse genuinely works, can noticeably reduce a problem that many women simply assumed they had to live with as a normal, unavoidable part of getting dressed every single day. Number 1. The blouse and body proportion match. Here is the realization that ties everything else together, and it is genuinely the most important thing in this entire video. Two women can both describe themselves as having a fuller midsection and still need two completely different blouse solutions, because fuller midsection does not actually describe one single identical body shape. It describes many. You might carry more fullness higher on your stomach, closer to your ribs. You might carry it lower, closer to your hips. You might carry it evenly through the whole middle, with no single area more prominent than another. You might be dealing with any of those in combination with a larger bust, a shorter torso, or a longer one. None of these combinations are wrong, and none of them need to be hidden. They simply mean different blouses will genuinely work differently for you than they might for someone else who also happens to describe her body the exact same general way. That is exactly why the solution here was never to use all 5 earlier methods at once. Layering blouson fabric, a curved hem, an open front, a wrap closure, and careful waistband checking all together in one single outfit. That would be exhausting, impractical, and honestly unnecessary. The real solution is identifying your own specific proportion combination and then choosing the 1 or 2 methods from everything we covered today that actually address it. Here is a simple way to work through that, one clear step at a time. First, notice exactly where a blouse first begins pulling or catching on your body, since that tells you where the real problem is actually happening. Second, check where the hem lands relative to your particular shape. Third, look at your side profile specifically, since that angle often reveals what the front view alone simply cannot show you. Fourth, sit down and notice whether the blouse rides upward, because that single-seated check catches problems a standing mirror will always miss. Fifth, check whether the front closure gapes open or collapses flat against you. Sixth, once you have noticed where the actual problem shows up, go back and choose whichever earlier method today directly solves that specific issue, rather than guessing or trying to use everything at once. And finally, keep that method only if it remains genuinely comfortable through real movement, not only in a still posed reflection. This does not need to feel scientific, complicated, or like tedious homework you dread every time. It is simply slowing down enough to notice what your own blouse is actually doing on your own particular body, instead of assuming a technique that worked beautifully for someone else's proportions will automatically work the same way for yours. You do not need every single fashion rule you have ever heard in your life to work perfectly on your body. You genuinely never did. What you truly need is a real understanding of which specific blouse construction actually works with your own individual proportions on the days you are standing still, and just as importantly, on the days you are sitting down, reaching for something, or simply walking through your own life exactly as you are right now. Conclusion. So if the French tuck has never worked the way it was supposed to for you, please let this be what you take away today. Your body was never the mistake. The French tuck is simply one styling method, not a universal law every blouse has to follow. What actually determines whether a blouse feels balanced and comfortable is its construction, matched honestly to your own individual proportions, not a single trick applied the exact same way to every body in every video. Keep checking while standing, sitting, walking, and turning to the side, because that is genuinely where the real answer lives, not in a single posed photograph. Keep only the method that works with your own body and your own daily movement, and let go of anything that does not, without guilt. I would love to know in the comments below which part of this frustrates you most: the pulling, the bunching, the riding upward, the waistband discomfort, the hem placement, or the front gapping. And if this helped, consider subscribing for more.